It was 2 o'clock in the morning and I was still awake. My husband was snoring beside me, the sound of his breathing was steady, almost mechanical, like a clock ticking in a room I no longer recognized. I lay on my side, one hand on my belly, feeling the faint flutter of 2 small lives inside me. 26 weeks. 2 tiny heartbeats that I had memorized from every ultrasound, every doctor's visit, every silent prayer whispered before sleep, but tonight, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy outside, the wind howled against the windows, brushing the frost across the glass. The house felt colder than usual, as if warmth had long abandoned it, or maybe it had just abandoned me. Eric turned over, pulling the blanket closer to his side. His face was peaceful, untouched by worry. I watched him for a moment, the man I once thought was my forever. The man who had once made me believe love meant safety. Now, I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked how I was feeling, or if I'd eaten, or if I was scared. Maybe he didn't need to ask. Maybe he didn't care. My lower back ached, a dull pain spreading like a bruise. I sat up slowly, wincing as I adjusted my swollen belly, and pressed a hand against my ribs. "You two okay in there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was no answer, of course. Just a soft kick, a reminder that even in my loneliness, I wasn't completely alone. I smiled weakly. "You're my little fighters, aren't you?" A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I wasn't crying because I was sad, at least that's what I told myself. I was crying because I couldn't remember what happiness felt like anymore. The room smelled faintly of cologne and detergent. Everything looked neat, organized, sterile, a reflection of how Eric liked things. My books, once scattered around, were stacked in the corner. The photos I loved, the ones of my parents, were tucked away in a drawer because they made the place look cluttered. He had a rule for everything. For a while, I had convinced myself it was love, that his desire for control meant he cared. But love doesn't feel like walking on glass. It doesn't sound like apologies whispered into pillows after every argument that wasn't your fault. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, pulling me back to the present. I drew the blanket tighter and closed my eyes. I tried to remember how it felt the first time I met Eric. I had been 22, juggling my last semester at the university and part-time tutoring jobs. He'd come to me as a student, polite, well-dressed, always with that charming smile. He listened when I spoke, brought me coffee after long lessons, laughed at my jokes. When he told me he loved me, I believed him without question. How could I not? He was older, confident, the kind of man who made promises sound like guarantees. Now, years later, I was married to that same man, and yet, it felt like living with a stranger. I turned toward him again. His mouth hung slightly open as he slept, his chest rising and falling under the glow of the dim lamp. I wondered if he ever thought about me when he looked at me now, not as his wife, not as the mother of his children, but as a person. I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand, my hand trembling slightly. My reflection in the mirror caught my eye, pale skin, tired eyes, lips cracked from the dry air. The woman staring back didn't look like me anymore. I took a sip and set the glass down. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. 2:14 a.m. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought whispered, how did I get here? I could almost hear my mother's voice, gentle and warm, reminding me of the girl I used to be, the one who loved reading under the willow tree behind our old house. The one who laughed easily, who believed kindness could fix anything. That girl was gone. Swallowed by years of trying to be enough for a man who only wanted control. I laid back down and closed my eyes. "I miss you," I whispered to the memory of who I used to be. Another kick, soft, reassuring. I smiled faintly. "I know," I said to my babies. "I'll get us out of this. Somehow." The words slipped out before I even thought about them. It wasn't a plan, just a promise, small and fragile, like the lives growing inside me. The radiator hissed. The house creaked. Eric shifted in his sleep, mumbling something I couldn't make out. I turned my back to him, facing the wall, and wrapped my arms around my belly. The warmth of my body against the cool sheets was the only comfort I had. I thought about tomorrow, about how he'd wake up, demand breakfast, complain about the noise, and scroll through his phone while I tried to smile through the exhaustion. He'd tell me to rest but would never lift a finger to help. I thought about how love had turned into routine, and routine into silence. The silence was the worst part. It was the kind that made you question your own voice. The kind that convinced you maybe you deserved it. My eyelids grew heavy, but sleep didn't come easily. My last thought before drifting off was that something inside me was beginning to crack. Not loudly, not violently, just quietly enough for me to notice. And that night, as the wind howled outside and my husband snored beside me, I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before. I was more alone in this marriage than I had ever been in my life. Morning came slow, wrapped in the gray light of winter. The city outside our window was quiet, blanketed in frost. But inside the house, everything was still, too still. Eric was already gone when I woke up. His side of the bed was cold, the sheets tucked tight the way he liked them. On the nightstand, he'd left a mug half full of black coffee, already cold, and a note in his clipped handwriting, meeting early. Don't wait for me. I stared at it for a long moment, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer. I used to keep every note he wrote me. Back then, they were sweet, reminders like lunch at your favorite place or don't forget your umbrella. Now, they were just instructions. I made myself tea and watched the steam rise, curling like smoke into the pale morning light. The twins kicked softly beneath my ribs, and I whispered, "Good morning, my loves." When I first met Eric, I thought the universe had finally decided to be kind to me. It was during my second year of university, at a friend's birthday party. I didn't even want to go. I had a tutoring session early the next morning, but my roommate insisted. "You've been buried in work for weeks, Nadia," she said. "Come on, live a little." The party was loud, crowded, full of people I barely knew. I was standing near the balcony, nursing a soda and counting the minutes until I could leave, when someone tapped my shoulder. "Mind if I stand here?" I turned, and there he was, tall, confident, with that kind of smile that made people lean in. Eric. He was a senior at the same university, majoring in business administration, and already had a reputation for being sharp, ambitious, and charming. We talked for hours that night. About books, music, the kind of life we wanted after graduation. He listened, really listened, his dark eyes steady on mine as if every word I said mattered. No one had ever made me feel that way before. When I mentioned that I'd lost my parents young, he looked at me with such quiet sympathy that I felt my throat tighten. "You must have been strong to handle that," he said. "You deserve someone who'll take care of you for once." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit a part of me I didn't even know was aching after that. He started showing up at the library where I studied. Always with coffee, sometimes with a joke, sometimes with silence, but always there. Within months, I was in love. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on a rainy afternoon, under the same oak tree where we first kissed. There was no ring then, just his hands, warm and steady, as he promised me forever. Our wedding was small, quiet, intimate. Just a few close friends and Martha, his mother. She had smiled politely, hugged me stiffly, and whispered, "Your family now, dear. Take good care of my son." I didn't know then that she didn't mean, take care of him, in the loving sense. She meant serve him. The first few months of marriage were beautiful, or at least, they looked that way. Eric was attentive, affectionate, always planning, always working. He'd bring me flowers, just because, cook dinner when I had a long day, hold me at night and talk about our future, the house we'd buy, the children we'd have, the trips we'd take. But then, little by little, things began to change. It started with small things, him insisting I stop tutoring because we didn't need the money and it was better for the family image. Then he asked me to tone down how I dressed when we went out, because people talk. I thought he was being protective. I didn't see the bars forming around me until the door had already closed. Soon, he wanted to know where I was every minute. He didn't like my friends. "They're bad influences," he'd say. He didn't like me talking to men, even my colleagues. "It's not appropriate," he'd insist. When I tried to push back, he'd laugh and call me dramatic. If I cried, he'd say I was too emotional, too sensitive, too much. I learned to quiet down, to keep peace. By the time I realized I was losing myself, it was already too late. The day I told him I was pregnant, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said, "That's unexpected." I waited for him to hug me, to celebrate, to be excited. He didn't. He just nodded and went back to checking his phone. That night, when I lay next to him, I felt both joy and dread tangled together in my chest. I thought the babies would bring us closer. That maybe, once he saw me carrying his children, he'd remember the man he used to be, but the opposite happened. He became colder, distant. Every time I asked for help, he sighed. Every time I smiled, he frowned. My growing belly became something he avoided looking at, as if it was an inconvenience rather than a miracle. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with irritation, not love, not pride, just resentment. "You used to be beautiful," he said once, after I dropped a plate because of my swollen fingers. "Now you just complain." That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until the water in the tub went cold. I started counting the days until the babies would arrive, convincing myself that once they were here, everything would be different. That he'd hold them, see their faces, and something inside him would soften again. But deep down, I already knew better. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen, I traced circles on my tea mug and whispered to the twins, "You'll have love, even if it's just from me." I looked at the empty seat across from me, his chair, always perfectly pushed in, his place untouched. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time, I realized the silence wasn't peace. It was captivity. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of cold that seeps through the walls and settles into your bones. I'd been awake since dawn, trying to clean the house before Eric came home from another business trip. He had left 3 days ago without saying when he'd be back. Lately, that was his pattern: short words, long absences, and no explanations. The window in our living room had a streak of dust I couldn't ignore. I stood on my toes, stretching as far as my swollen belly would allow, one hand balancing on the frame, the other holding a cloth. The world outside was gray. Bare trees, patches of snow, a sky that looked tired. When my foot slipped on the wet floor, I didn't even have time to scream. The pain came first, sharp and sudden, slicing through my abdomen. Then warmth, a strange rush between my legs. For a moment, I just stared down, not believing what I was seeing. The floor beneath me glistened with water. My heart stopped. No. No, no, please, I whispered, pressing both hands to my belly. Not now. Please, not yet. The twins kicked, faint and frantic, as if they could feel my panic. I reached for my phone with trembling hands. My mind was a blur. Eric. I had to call Eric. The first call rang until voicemail, the second went straight to busy.By. The third, I was sobbing. Please, Eric, pick up. I need you. Please. Nothing. The room spun. Pain rippled through my back, sharper now, followed by another gush of fluid. I could barely stand. My breathing came in short, broken gasps. I scrolled through my contacts, fingers slippery with sweat, and accidentally pressed a name I didn't mean to. I didn't even realize it until a calm, deep voice answered, "Hello? Eric?" I froze. And no, it's Nadia. There was a pause. Nadia? Are you okay? I think my water broke, I stammered. I tried to call Eric, but he didn't. Where are you right now? His voice sharpened immediately. All business, at home. I can't move. I don't know what to do. Stay on the line, he said firmly. I'm coming right now. Don't move, Nadia. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I blinked through tears, confused. Felix? Yes. Just stay with me. For the next few minutes, I could only hear his voice, calm, steady, grounding me as my world fell apart. He told me to sit down, to breathe slowly, to unlock the door. I did everything he said, clinging to his voice like a lifeline. When the front door burst open, I saw him, slightly out of breath, still in his suit, snow dusting his shoulders. His eyes went straight to me. Can you stand? He asked. I shook my head, crying harder. He didn't hesitate. He scooped me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. The scent of his coat, clean, like cedar and rain, filled my lungs as he carried me to his car. It's okay, he murmured. You're safe now. Just breathe. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and pain. I tried to focus on the rhythm of his voice as he talked softly to me, keeping me conscious. Everything's going to be all right. You're doing great, Nadia. At the hospital, nurses rushed toward us the moment we arrived. Felix spoke quickly to them, his tone controlled but urgent. I caught fragments of his words: 26 weeks, premature rupture, husband unreachable. They wheeled me into a room, hooked me to monitors, started 4 lines. The bright lights made my eyes sting. Felix stayed just outside the curtain, his presence steady and quiet. When the doctor said, "She's in active labor," I panicked. "It's too soon," I whispered. "They're not ready." The nurse squeezed my hand. "We'll take care of you, honey. You just focus on breathing." The contractions came faster. I screamed, cried, begged, prayed. Between each wave of pain, I looked toward the door, hoping Eric would walk in. He never did, but Felix never left. Hours passed. And then, 2 cries. Thin, fragile, but alive. I remember asking, "Are they okay?" And hearing the doctor say, "They're small, but strong." I wanted to see them, to hold them, but my body gave out. The last thing I saw before the world went black was Felix's face through the blur of tears and exhaustion, his expression full of concern, his lips moving as he told me to rest. When I woke, the room was dim. Machines hummed softly. My throat was dry, my body aching. A nurse smiled when she saw me stir. "You've got 2 little fighters," she said kindly. "Both in the NICU, doing well." Relief flooded me so suddenly I started to cry again. Beside the bed, a chair creaked. I turned my head and saw Felix, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, eyes tired but alert. "Hey," he said softly. "You scared us for a while there." I tried to smile. "You stayed?" "Of course." "Eric?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. His jaw tightened. I called him. Several times. He didn't answer. Something inside me broke. Not loudly, not violently, just a quiet realization that there was no one coming for me. Felix seemed to sense it. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not alone, Nadia. You have your babies. And you have help, whatever you need." Tears welled in my eyes again. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was nod. He smiled faintly, then stood. "Rest. I'll check on the twins." When he left, I stared at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness beside me where my husband should have been. For the first time since I'd said, "I do," I whispered something I never thought I'd admit. "I can't do this with him anymore." The words hung in the sterile air. Soft but true. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet, relentless, as if the world itself was trying to wash everything clean. 3 days after the twins were born, I was discharged. The doctor insisted I rest, but rest felt impossible when my mind refused to stop replaying everything: the accident, the labor, the empty silence where my husband's voice should have been. Felix drove me home. The car was warm, the heater humming softly as snow flurried past the windows. I held a small blanket the nurses had given me, still smelling faintly of the hospital, a reminder of my sons lying in the NICU, tiny but fighting. "You sure you're okay?" Felix asked gently, glancing at me from the driver's seat. I nodded, though my throat was too tight to answer. When we pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong before I even stepped out of the car. The curtains were drawn, the porch light off, and the front door, my front door, stood slightly ajar. A chill crawled up my spine. Felix noticed it too. "Stay here," he said quietly, his tone suddenly serious. He walked ahead, pushed the door open, and flicked on the light. The sight that greeted us was hollow. The living room was empty. The sofa gone. The shelves bare. Even the framed photos from our wedding, the ones Eric once said he loved, had vanished from the wall, leaving faint rectangles of dust. I stood frozen in the doorway. "No." Felix turned to me slowly, his expression dark. "Nadia, you should sit down." I stepped past him, shaking my head. My hand brushed over the coffee table, or where it used to be, then across the empty space where our TV once stood. The kitchen was stripped bare too, except for a single envelope resting on the counter. My name, written in his handwriting. With trembling hands, I tore it open. "Nadia, I'm done. Don't try to find me. You'll manage on your own. You always wanted control, right? Consider this your freedom." Eric, the paper slipped from my fingers. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The walls around me seemed to close in, the air thinning until I thought I might collapse. Felix caught me by the shoulders before I could fall. Hey, look at me." I couldn't. My vision blurred with tears that burned like acid. "He's gone," I whispered. "He just left." Felix said nothing at first. His silence wasn't pity, it was something steadier, heavier. He helped me to the couch that wasn't there anymore and lowered me gently to the floor instead. "You're not alone," he said softly. "Not anymore." I cried until my body gave out, not loud sobs, but the quiet kind that empties you from the inside out. Felix stayed the entire time, sitting nearby without a word. When I finally calmed, I looked at him, exhausted. Why would he do this? I asked. He met my gaze evenly. "Because men like him don't know how to love without control." Something in his voice told me he'd seen this before, maybe not in his own life, but close enough to understand. He helped me pack what little was left. Clothes, a few baby things, a couple of books Eric hadn't cared to take. Then he drove me to his sister's empty guest apartment across town, insisting I stay there until I figured out my next steps. "I'll handle the paperwork," he said. "You just focus on healing." I wanted to argue, but I was too tired. For the next week, I moved between the hospital and the apartment, visiting the twins every morning. Felix came by every evening with food, updates, or sometimes just quiet company. It was during one of those evenings that the phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me told me to. "Hello?" A familiar voice slurred on the other end. "So this is what you wanted, huh? Playing the victim? Making me look bad?" My stomach dropped. "Eric." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think you can embarrass me? Run to my boss like some helpless damsel?" I froze. "Felix called you because I was in labor, Eric. You weren't there." "Oh please," he spat. "You've always needed attention. Maybe that's why you couldn't keep your legs closed around him." My breath caught in my throat. "Stop." "What, too honest for you now?" he sneered. "I know what's going on. You think he doesn't tell me things? I've got my own plans. Real ones. Not sitting around babysitting like you." "Plans?" I asked quietly. He snorted. "You wouldn't understand. Let's just say I've got something that's going to make me a lot of money soon. The kind that'll make everyone sorry they ever underestimated me." There was noise in the background, music, voices, laughter. "He was in a bar, Eric. What did you do?" "None of your business," he said, and hung up. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. Felix, who had been standing near the counter, studied me carefully. "What did he say?" I swallowed hard. "Something about money. And making people sorry." He sounded drunk. I think he's planning something stupid." Felix's expression hardened. "Did he say anything about the company?" "Just that he had a plan. Something big." I didn't understand. Felix exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "All right. Leave it with me." "Felix," he shook his head. "Don't worry. Just focus on the babies. I'll take care of this." And in that moment, the tone of his voice changed, from gentle to resolute. It wasn't the tone of a man trying to comfort anymore, it was the tone of someone preparing for a fight. That night, I lay awake in the small apartment, listening to the rain tapping against the window. The city lights reflected on the glass like ghostly stars. Eric's voice still echoed in my head, cruel, slurred, distant. But beneath it, another voice lingered, Felix's. Calm. Certain, you're not alone. I pressed a hand to my stomach, feeling the faint emptiness where life had once kicked and fluttered. My sons were safe now, growing stronger each day, and I owed it to them to do the same. Somewhere out there, my husband was destroying himself, and for the first time, I realized, I wasn't going to follow him down anymore. After everything collapsed, the silence was almost unbearable. The house felt too large for one woman and two newborns, every corner echoing with memories of what had once been, laughter, footsteps, and words that had turned cruel far too quickly. Eric was gone. Truly gone this time. No more messages, no more calls, no more apologies that meant nothing. The chaos he left behind was mine to face alone, and for the first time. I didn't run from it. I remember standing by the window that first morning after his arrest, holding my sons close as dawn spilled weakly across the sky. I whispered, "It's just us now," and something in my chest steadied. It wasn't confidence exactly, more like quiet determination. I had been broken before, but not this time. Not anymore. The first few weeks were survival. Sleepless nights, bottles that never seemed clean fast enough, tiny cries that pulled me from shallow dreams. But slowly, piece by piece, I began to build a rhythm, not the life I used to have, but something new. I took the old laptop from the closet, the one I'd used back in college, and opened a blank page. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain, until I finally typed English lessons with Nadia, online tutoring for beginners. It felt small, even silly at first. Who would want to learn from a tired single mother juggling twins? But to my surprise, within a week, I had my first student, a teenage girl from Brazil. Then another, a woman in her 40s who wanted to improve her English for work. And then more. Every class reminded me that I still had something to offer. My voice, my patience, my knowledge, they were still mine. The lessons paid just enough for formula and rent, but what they truly gave me was purpose. Days turned into months. The twins grew stronger, their laughter filling the quiet spaces. I started writing again, small journal entries about healing, about motherhood, about forgiving myself for ever believing I was unworthy of love, and through it all, Felix never disappeared. He and his daughter Chloe became part of our small world without asking permission. Some evenings, they brought dinner. Other times, Chloe insisted on helping me read bedtime stories to the babies, her tiny voice making them giggle uncontrollably. Felix never pitied me, and that was what I valued most. His presence wasn't loud or intrusive. He'd fix the leaking faucet, carry groceries upstairs, or simply sit in the kitchen while I worked. Sometimes we talked for hours after Chloe had fallen asleep, about books, music, or the small absurdities of daily life. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, and the silence between us felt peaceful instead of heavy. I began to notice the way he looked at me, not as someone fragile, but as someone who had survived. It scared me, a little, how natural it felt to let him stay. One late afternoon, near the end of summer, he invited me and the boys to join him and Chloe at the park. The sky was painted gold, the air warm and gentle. The twins were finally big enough to sit in the stroller without crying, and Chloe ran ahead with a kite that refused to fly. We sat on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree, watching the children play. The light fell softly on Felix's face, catching in his eyes as he turned toward me. "You've changed," he said quietly. I smiled, adjusting the stroller's shade. "That's what happens when you rebuild from ashes." He nodded, thoughtful. "You didn't just rebuild, Nadia. You became lighter, stronger." I looked at him, unsure what to say. I had to. The sound of children laughing carried across the grass. Chloe was chasing butterflies now, her hair glowing in the sunlight. Felix watched her for a long time before speaking again. "I care about you," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. "Not because you need someone, but because of who you are." The words caught me off guard. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. No one had ever said that to me, not without expectation, not without control. My throat tightened. "Felix." He shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." I stared at the ground, blinking back unexpected tears. I wasn't ready for love, not again, not yet. But something in me stirred at his words, a spark I thought had long died. It wasn't the dizzy kind of hope I'd once mistaken for love. It was quieter, safer, like the warmth of sunlight on cold skin. We sat in silence for a while, listening to Chloe's laughter and the faint cries of the twins. The world felt still, suspended between endings and beginnings. Finally, I whispered, "I'm not ready." "I know," he said softly, a small smile touching his lips. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." I turned to look at him then, really look, and I saw not a savior, but a man who simply stood beside me. No expectations, no demands. Just steady kindness. The sun dipped lower, painting everything in gold. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth spread through me, a quiet reminder that maybe, just maybe, love could exist without pain. That day, I realized something I'd never understood before: real love wasn't about being rescued. It was about being seen, respected, and free, and for the first time in a long while, I felt alive again. 1 year later, the seasons had made a full circle. And so had I. The tiny apartment that once echoed with loneliness was now filled with life, laughter, footsteps, and the occasional chaos of toys scattered across the floor. The twins had learned to walk, wobbling around like miniature explorers, bumping into furniture and giggling every time I pretended to be shocked. Work had become more than survival. My online English classes had grown beyond what I'd imagined. I now had students from all over: mothers in Spain, college kids in Korea, even a retired man in Canada who told me he waited for my lessons like they were letters from a friend. My name, Nadia Clark, online English tutor, was suddenly something that meant more than single mother or divorced woman. It was mine. My little victory. Every morning began the same. I'd make coffee while the boys climbed over each other in their playpen, sunlight spilling through the window, soft music playing in the background. It was ordinary. But for me, ordinary had become sacred. Felix and Chloe were still part of our world, not as guests anymore, but as family. They had a way of showing up that felt natural, like they'd always belonged here. Chloe called my twins her brothers, proudly teaching them new words while Felix helped me set up a new desk for my lessons. Sometimes, when we all sat together, the four of them laughing over pancakes, syrup everywhere, I would look around and feel an ache so full it almost hurt. Not pain, but gratitude. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the one I'd built. One evening in late spring, Felix came over after work, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked at me with that familiar quiet warmth. "The boys are getting big," he said, glancing at them as they toddled toward Chloe's crayons. "They're unstoppable," I replied, smiling. "Like their mother." He laughed softly. "You can't take credit for all of it. Try me." He shook his head, amused. "You're impossible. And yet, you're still here," I teased. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I am." Something in his voice made my heart shift, not with surprise, but with recognition. We'd been building this slowly, without labels or pressure. Just time, trust, and small gestures that meant everything. We didn't need to say it out loud. Love had returned in a quieter form, steady, patient, and safe. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, I sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. I thought about how far I'd come, from the terrified girl begging her husband to pick up the phone, to the woman who could finally breathe on her own. Eric had been sentenced months ago. The company had pressed charges after all, and he'd taken a plea deal. I heard he'd moved out of state after serving his time. There were no more phone calls, no apologies. Just silence. A silence I could finally live with. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't forgive him either. I just let him go because holding on, even to anger, meant keeping a piece of that life alive, and I was done living inside old pain. Now, my days were full of small, beautiful things. A student's email saying she'd passed her exam. Chloe's laughter echoing down the hall. The twins clapping their hands when I sang their favorite song. Felix's hand brushing against mine when we cooked together. There were no grand gestures, no perfect endings, just quiet consistency. And maybe that was what real happiness looked like. One Sunday morning, we all went to the park again. The air smelled of new grass and blooming lilacs. The twins ran after Chloe, and Felix watched them with a soft smile. I leaned back on the bench, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the sunlight warm my skin. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush, to fix, to earn peace. It was already here, in this ordinary day, in the people beside me, in the rhythm of life that finally felt like mine. Felix reached over, his fingers brushing mine. "You look happy," he said. "I am," I whispered, and I meant it. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be, the one who waited by the phone, who measured her worth by someone else's attention. I don't hate her. I just wish I could hold her hand and tell her, "You make it out. You learn how to live again." It's been almost 2 years now. The twins are talking, their favorite word is again. Because they never want anything to end. Chloe still visits every afternoon after school, her backpack stuffed with crayons and snacks. Felix always arrives after work, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. As if the world outside can finally rest when he walks through the door. We've built something together, not out of need, but out of choice. Every evening, when the kids are asleep, we sit on the balcony with tea and quiet conversation. The city hums below us, steady and distant, while the stars blink faintly above the rooftops. It's not the kind of love that burns. It's the kind that stays, Felix once told me. You're the calm after my storm. But I think it's the other way around. He found me after I learned how to stand again. Sometimes people ask if I'm afraid to love after what happened. I always smile and say, no. I'm not afraid of love. I'm just done mistaking pain for it. I used to believe love meant surrender, giving up pieces of myself until there was nothing left. But now, I understand love as freedom. It's two whole people standing side by side. Not one hiding behind the other. One Saturday evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the park into a golden sea, we all went for a walk, Felix pushing the stroller, Chloe skipping ahead, and the twins giggling at the fluttering leaves. The light wrapped around us like a soft blanket. Felix looked at me, a gentle smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You know, he said, you've come a long way. I laughed. We both have. He nodded. Yeah. But you built something beautiful out of the ruins. I looked ahead, watching the kids chase after one another, the world soft and alive around them. And for the first time in forever, I believed him. We reached the pond where Chloe liked to feed the ducks. The twins were squealing, pointing, their little fingers sticky with crumbs. Felix stood beside me, his hand brushing mine, not claiming, not asking, just there. Present. Steady. I turned to him and whispered, almost to myself, I used to think I needed someone to rescue me. Now I know I rescued myself first. Felix's hand tightened slightly around mine. And that's exactly why you deserve everything good that comes next. I smiled, blinking against the light. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and rose, the last rays spilling across the water. The children's laughter rose into the air, echoing with the soft murmur of life moving forward. In that moment, I realized healing wasn't about forgetting what broke you, it was about building something better in the same place. Eric was a chapter one had already closed. This laughter, this peace, this love built on respect, was the story I had written for myself. I bent down to pick up one of my sons, who had tripped on the grass, and he looked up at me with wide eyes and said, Mommy, you okay? I smiled. I am, sweetheart. I really am. As the last light of the day faded into the calm of evening, I held my children close and looked toward the horizon, no longer afraid of what came next, because I finally knew, I hadn't been abandoned. I had been chosen. By life. By love. By myself.